Emily, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, why do you think women are so uncomfortable talking about their sexual desires with their partners?
So, if you were raised as a woman or if you're a vulva owner, think for a second about what messages you specifically got about sex growing up. Chances are you heard things like your virginity is something you give to someone else. Sex is something only men want. And it's kind of like, where is the education, focus, or attention on female sexual pleasure? I think that there's just so much gender bias that comes into play into how men versus women are socialized as they're growing up. And so it's something I think a lot of women feel uncomfortable about because there's just not, until more recently, I think many healthy role models that women have, where they can see women expressing their sexual desires in a way that is coming from a place of empowerment, in a way that is candid, in a way that is honest and authentic. And so I think it's just something that, for those reasons, women have been historically very uncomfortable with.
And it's so funny because as I was doing the kind of the opening remarks, Sex and the City popped into my head, right? And
Yeah.
so that was like one of those shows that really did talk about sex, and it really, put it out there. And you would think that at today in 2022, we would be so much more comfortable in having that conversation, but we still aren't.
We're not there. And yes, I think Sex and the City was a show that definitely revolutionized the way
Yeah.
that a lot of women think about sexuality. I know it's a show that I remember being in college and everyone crowding around, the TV in the common area in the dorm room to watch the latest episode. But you're right, we still have a long way to go. I think it's one of those things that it changes little by little. We're moving in a positive direction, but we're not where we need to be yet.
I agree. I feel like we are moving in a positive direction. So let me ask you another question here. As women get older and go through menopause,
Mm-hmm.
we often hear about it as having a negative effect on their sex life. Why do you think this, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing that happens during menopause are these crazy hormonal changes, and that makes a lot of women feel really crappy. A lot of women struggle with insomnia, hot flashes, mood instability, brain fog, irritability, and it's sort of this like Jekyll and Hyde. And so, a lot of women just aren't feeling like themselves. And you really cannot separate your sexuality from your individuality. And so if there's any point in life when you're going through a big identity shift, and especially because of the hormones that are at play during menopause that just make you feel kind of crummy, you don't feel good, you're not going to want to have sex. I think a lot of women think that the changes that happen during menopause have a direct effect on desire, but when we take a really careful and comprehensive look on the research, we really can't blame hormonal changes as directly as maybe we would like. The low desire seems to come more about because of the changes that are happening to our body, the weight gain. So there may be body image issues at play, and really just not feeling very well. But when you look at women who are on the other side, or women who maybe have stabilized through like hormone replacement therapy, a lot of women find that in older age, they rediscover their sexuality in a way that can even be a lot more enjoyable than it was in their younger years.
I love thinking like that. And I almost feel like maybe this is where we need to do more education, right? So as
Yeah.
women hit their mid, like 35 and going into their 40s, to start
Mhm.
educating them about the importance of staying in shape and eating right, and
Yeah.
making time for themselves, because I
Mhm.
feel especially at this juncture, so many women are putting off having kids until they're later in life, right? And
Right.
then they have pretty high up the career ladder. And so it's just that gentle nudge to say, hey, you're in your 40s now.
Yeah.
It's really important to make sure that your health and that you're taking care of you, because once you start going through perimenopause, it
Yeah.
can be a little bit challenging, but it doesn't mean game over.
Right. And I think you are spot on at starting to implement some of those changes as a preventative measure because, let's say there are some women who are, find it pretty easy to stay in shape. They can kind of eat whatever they want. Well, for a lot of women, that changes after they go through menopause. And so if you haven't started implementing a regular exercise routine, and doing strength training especially is really important, because muscle mass declines a little bit through menopause. And the more muscle we have, usually the more we can manage changing testosterone levels, which is also important. And also there tends to be a very strong correlation between moderate exercise and sexual desire. And there's, a lot of feel-good chemicals that are released through exercise. So it's something that's really important through every life stage, but definitely through the menopause period as well.
I love that message, and it just resonates so well, perfect with our audience. So thank you for sharing that important insight. What are some of the most common complaints you hear from couples when it comes to their sexual life? Now I feel like we're getting into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. So by far, the most common complaint I get are couples who are coming in struggling with a discrepancy in sexual desire, meaning that one person in the relationship wants to have sex more or less than the other one. And in most relationships, there's a little bit of a higher desire and lower desire partner. That, rarely do we get with someone with whom we match up 100% of the time. Where couples run into trouble, though, is when that gap really widens. And that gap can widen for any number of reasons. Especially what I see in heterosexual couples is that a lot more tends to fall on the woman's shoulders in terms of, if she's, let's say, still working in addition to having a full-time job, she's also the one managing the household and, managing the children. And of course, there might be changes that come through the postpartum period. And so there can just be a lot going on, I think, for women in particular, that can cause desire to dwindle a little bit versus, again, and we're talking about, this is what I see primarily in heterosexual couples, whereas, the male partner doesn't tend to have as much of those burdens and responsibility. And so he can be a little more freed up to feel in the mood for sex. And so that's just one of many reasons that I see an increase in that discrepancy in desire. And, another reason is that couples sometimes just get kind of complacent over time. They, like many people, think sex should happen automatically and spontaneously. And if it's not happening the way it did in the honeymoon phase, then the connection is lost. But that's not the case either. And so really it's about making each other a priority and carving out time that is sacred for each of you in the relationship to spend time together and connect as a couple. But desire, despite the fact that it's the most common issue, it is the most complex issue. I could have like 5 different couples come in complaining of desire issues, and there can be like 15 different reasons why they're having it. So it is very complex, but it is very common as well.
Have you seen more so since COVID?
Yeah, COVID took a toll on relationships. It took a big toll.
Yeah.
Yes. My phone lines were ringing off the hook, a few months into the lockdown. I think that for couples who were already struggling, it added an additional strain on relationships. And people really need personal outlets. I mean, having a little bit of space in a relationship is really healthy. People were unable to get together with friends, and their social support systems weren't there to the same extent. Suddenly they're having to teach their children at home in addition to everything else. And so it was a really, really hard time for couples. Definitely.
Yeah. On top of that, like a lot of the gyms and classes that you would normally go to release some tension and stress were all shut down too. So it was it was kind of a hot mess.
Yeah. Now there were also some couples who I think were perhaps spending so much time apart that now that they're in lockdown, they had a positive benefit of, having no excuse but to refocus on each other again. And so there were also some couples whose sex lives got a little spicy and exciting during COVID because suddenly they had extra downtime to, express some desires or fantasies maybe they had that they, just didn't think about expressing before because they were so busy. So I
love the good and bad of COVID-19.
Yeah,
right? Like the COVID positive. Yeah, it's all good.
Mhm.
So now with Valentine's Day coming up, what are some tips on how to take advantage of the holiday?
You know, I'm not a huge Valentine's Day
I'm not either.
fan.
Yeah,
I
I'm
really
not either.
I mean, I just think I hate putting so much pressure on one day. I really encourage couples to do little things throughout the year that are romantic and, demonstrative of your love for one another. But if that isn't something you're very good at, Valentine's Day can always be a really good reminder. And I really encourage couples to talk ahead of time about how they might like to spend the day or the evening together, or how they might like to celebrate. I think sometimes there's a little bit too much pressure on one person in the relationship to like create something, really romantic for the other person. But I think that couples can do a lot better when they collaborate and they, discuss how they'd like to spend their time together, because that's going to look different for everybody.
It really, you're absolutely right. It will look for everyone. And sometimes just even, a special homemade dinner can just,
Yeah,
by the other partner could be a big win, right? Just like something,
exactly. Sometimes
yeah,
it's the little things, or,
yeah.
maybe on Valentine's Day, you give your partner little vouchers that they can cash in throughout the
Yeah.
rest of the year. Something like that, I think, is really nice. But I always discourage couples from waiting for this one day to show their love. I mean, you should be doing little things on a regular basis. I mean, my husband has never been the best at grand romantic gestures, but it means so much to me that he brings me my coffee every morning. And, to me, that is so sweet and romantic and thoughtful. And I'm like, you're off the hook for Valentine's Day.
Exactly. Just coffee in the morning or
Yeah,
doing the dishes every night after dinner.
right.
You got it. You got
Exactly.
my heart.
Yes, yes.
So, as many of us who have been with our partner for a long time,
Mhm.
what are some of the suggestions you have for couples to kind of restart and reinvigorate their sex life? That's actually a really good question. So, for people
Yeah.
that have been in a relationship for a long time that may be on that, just like I'm bored, like, we've
Mhm.
been doing this for a long time. What are some suggestions on how to put that little spark back into the relationship?
So, my first suggestion would be to adjust your expectations and stop waiting or hoping that it's going to look and feel the way it did in the honeymoon stage.
Mm.
The honeymoon stage of the relationship can be wonderful, and the rose colored glasses are on, and everything seems really easy and spontaneous and effortless. And that can be great, but it's also a very passive process. And the honeymoon stage doesn't last, because if it did, we wouldn't get anything done. The honeymoon stage is built into our hardwiring to bond us to one another, but eventually their neurochemicals come back down to regular levels, and there's sort of a disconnect of the egos that happens again. And so then it's a process of intentionally cultivating passion in the relationship. And a lot of people don't know how to do that, because we are force fed the idea that passion and sex is only good if it's spontaneous. And that's just not true. It is a sex lie. It's one of the most pervasive myths about sexuality. When we look at the research on couples who maintain really optimal levels of sexual satisfaction in long-term monogamous relationships, or in any long-term relationship, a lot of them talk about how they plan for great sex. And I always remind people too that back in the early days when you were dating, you were planning it. You just didn't call it that. You called it, I'll pick you up on Saturday night. But everyone knew what was going down at the end of the night on Saturday night. And there was a lot of positive anticipation and planning and preparation and thought that went into that. And so we have to have the same mentality even after, years of being together. And so a lot of people balk when I suggest that they start carving time out from one another to connect sexually, because they're like, well, if it's not going to be good if it's scheduled. Well, first of all, I like the word planned better. I feel like you schedule a colonoscopy, but you plan a fun date with your girlfriend, right? So I like the word planned. So let's all use the word planned. And I think the word planned also connotes the idea that we're putting thought and intention and preparation into something that we feel excited about. And so I really, really encourage couples on carving time out for one another on a weekly basis. And that doesn't mean you have to have sex during that time, but if it's a time that you can give each other your undivided attention, if there is the opportunity to at least connect sensually during that time together, I think that that goes a long way. But then that's when love becomes more of an active process. And to me, that is so much more romantic than this passive process that exists earlier on. And so there are lots of things couples can do to maximize that time together. And that's really what can help sustain a really positive sexual connection over the years.
That's such great advice. So, one thing that's I'm thinking about is you're telling me these great tips. Is when do couples know they need to see someone like you, like a sex therapist? When is the right time, and how do they find someone that they can? Because I would think that making that first phone call is such a big step, is a big hurdle.
Yeah, totally. So if you or your partner is expressing a lot of dissatisfaction about the emotional climate of the relationship or about the sexual climate of the relationship, then it's time to pick up the phone and call. It's not uncommon for one person to feel like there's nothing wrong and the other person to really be suffering. But I always tell people this is not a you versus them problem. If there's a problem for one person, then it's a couple's problem. And I think it's kind of borderline disrespectful to ignore your partner when they say, hey, I'm really struggling here, or there's an element about our relationship that I think we need to work on. We have to learn to grow over time in our relationships, or else the relationship is going to stagnate. And so couples, if your partner says that they're suffering or they're struggling with something, it's your job to step up to the plate, even if in the beginning maybe you see yourself as just a source of support. But really, I encourage couples to view anything as a couple issue, because then you can look at it. I help people like externalize the problem. So rather, it's like you have a problem with this and I don't, or I have a problem with this and you have a problem with something else. It's like, okay, this is the problem out here. How can we as a couple work together to minimize the effect of that problem? And that little shift in mindset can go a long way.
It really can. Thank you for sharing that, because I love hearing the advice, but it's just like, when do you know, and most of us will know. I mean, you do know there's a trouble, there could be trouble, but when do you take that first step? And I just think it just sounds like it's a game changer once you can start addressing some of the issues. I can just imagine some of the good things that have happened with couples that you've been working with. So it's such a timely conversation. And I, again, just want to thank you for your time today and sharing such great tips.
Yeah.
So I'm going back to my list of questions here. Your February column is focusing on how you may experience desire differently from your partner. Can you give us a little teaser on that?
Definitely. So, a lot of people, we talked, this kind of circles back actually to your first question, I think, which was why do so many women feel inhibited when it comes to expressing their sexual desires to their partner? And I think that kind of circles back because a lot of the way that we think about sexual desire tends to be the kind of the stereotypical male model of sexual response, which is more of a linear model. It's like first you have desire, then arousal, then maybe an orgasm, and that's it. And then the whole process starts over again. But that's not the way a lot of people experience sexual desire. And so what this piece is about is the difference between the spontaneous model of sexual desire and what we refer to as the responsive model of sexual desire, which is more of a circular model of sexual desire, and the way a larger percentage of women experience sexual desire. And what's really important to know, and this is the case whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or in a same-sex relationship, that people sometimes experience desire a little bit differently. And it's not a matter of trying to change your partner so that they're more like you, but more about understanding, respecting, and navigating some of the differences in a way that makes you feel mutually empowered and sexually satisfied. And so that's what the piece is about next month.
So everyone's going to have to stay tuned and read your column.
Yes, definitely.
Coming out. Yep. As you know, in addition to Valentine's Day, February is also American Heart Month.
Mm-hmm.
Sex is a form of exercise. Do you recommend sex as part of an overall healthier lifestyle?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think there's so many self-proclaimed health nuts out there that completely ignore the importance of health and the benefit of a relationship on to feel and I think Beth may have just check in with the tech team for a second. Okay, wait, there she is. Are you there, Beth? Okay. Beth, we got you back. Okay.
Oh, there you are. I can
There
hear you
you
now.
are. Okay, good.
Okay, perfect. So we were talking about heart. We were talking about,
Yeah.
do you recommend sex as like for a healthier lifestyle?
Yes. And so I don't think I was frozen during that clip. I think you were frozen during
Oh,
the clip.
no.
So yes, I did answer. And I think that, yes, sexual health is such an important part of overall health and well-being. I mean, there's studies that show people who are sexually satisfied do have better physical health, lower blood pressure, tend to feel their lives are more meaningful. They tend to be happier overall. So it's a really important part of our overall health and well-being, and unfortunately one that people seem to ignore.
No, I think I agree 100%. And we've even seen research that says, a healthy sex life does affect your overall health and wellness. So I do more. So as we look into wrapping up our conversation today, what are the 3 things that you would recommend to women that are experiencing these and actually communicating some hurdles that they're experiencing with their sexual health and with their partner?
You cut out a little bit in the first part of your question. Can you just repeat the very
beginning? I'm sorry. So I would just say like 3 things that you would recommend the people that are listening today, if you're having problems with, sexual health and you're like having that conversation with your partner or healthcare provider, what would you recommend?
Oh, okay. So if you're having problems sexually with your partner and you're wanting to talk to your healthcare provider about that, how would you do so is the question.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So, a lot of healthcare providers are not the best people to go to, unfortunately. So actually, well, if you have a good relationship with your healthcare provider, go to them and say, hey, this is something I'm struggling with. Do you have any resources for me? And some people may have a great list of resources. Some people may be able to give you, really great advice, but sexual health is not something a lot of healthcare providers are trained in. Even like OBGYNs and urologists don't always have a ton of information on how to talk to their patients about sex. And so sometimes they're not the best people to go to right off the bat. I think finding a really good online source that's reputable, like Healthy Women or an account like mine, can be a good first step. And then you can reach out and see what kinds of resources we have. Definitely, if you can find a certified sex therapist in your area, sometimes just even scheduling a one-time session just to know who you should go to address your concern is also a good step. But my number one piece of advice would be to not hold back. Don't feel shy about reaching out for help, because our sexuality is so important. It is one of the most important elements of relationships. I mean, sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction go hand in hand. And we cannot neglect that. And it is very common. I mean, the percentages are like off the charts that at some point someone is going to have a sexual difficulty. So there is nothing abnormal or wrong with you. It's unlikely that the neighbors are having better sex than you. But there are people out there who can help, and don't feel shy or think there's something abnormal because you're having a sexual issue. I mean, we all need help sometimes, and sex is an important part of our health.
I couldn't say it better. Thank you so much. And what about telemedicine? Are you seeing patients via telemedicine? Are you seeing an uptake in that?
Yeah, so I will say here in Houston, most of my patients are definitely in person now. People want to get back in person. I just think that telemedicine is awesome, and it's opened the door for so many people who maybe didn't have access to a therapist in their immediate vicinity. And so I'm primarily doing in person now, but yeah, through COVID, I did a lot of telemedicine, and there are a lot of therapists who have really moved more to doing telemedicine exclusively. And so if you live in an area where you don't have a good sex therapist in your city, chances are there's one in a neighboring city or in whatever state. Usually you have to see someone who's licensed in your state that you live in. And so just check all of that. But, you know, if you're in a smaller town, then telemedicine can give you access to see someone who is maybe in a bigger city that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to see pre-COVID.
No, such great advice. Emily, thank you so much for carving out some time to talk to us today before Valentine's Day. Again, we're not putting any pressure on anyone with Valentine's Day coming up, but if you do have a sexual health issue or question, please visit Healthy Women. Read Dr. Emily's column that appears on Healthy Women, and get help. You can, find a certified sexual therapist in your area and make the call, because once you make that call, the door will open and you'll be a healthier you for doing it. So again, thank you for your time today. Have a great week.
Thank you, Beth. Y'all take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.